Hey everybody, let's talk about audio. My name is Doug. I'm with Doug Johnson Productions, Orem, Utah. And let's talk today a little bit about microphones, wireless microphones. So talk to you a little bit about why I selected the ones that I did and how I ended up there. So I've been doing audio a lot longer than I've actually been doing video. I've been doing audio for, my gosh, 25 years or more. And through the years, tried different brands, used other brands, working in other facilities, things like that. And I've settled on AKG as my preferred brand for wireless microphones. I've used Shure, I've used Sony, I've used Sennheiser, I've used a ton of them. And AKG has turned out to be my favorite, and that's actually what I've done for my own needs. So all of my wireless microphones, AKG, without exception. I've at this point eliminated everything else. A couple reasons for that. One, sound quality. The sound quality on the AKG stuff I think is far better than most of the other ones, and reliability is the other one. So in the, 15 years that I've been using AKG, other than a mic going way out of range, I have never had a dropout, pop, static, anything. They've all worked absolutely flawlessly, no problems whatsoever. And I can't say that about other systems. You know, I've had serious problems with dropouts of some of the other brands, especially the Sennheiser. So I've landed on AKG, and I've been absolutely thrilled with the products. The downside for AKG is that they're a little bit harder to get in the United States. They're an Austrian company, and they're not super popular here, so there aren't a lot of people that bring them in. Some of their lower-end products do fairly well here in the US, not compared to the other brands, but still reasonably well. But their higher-end stuff is actually pretty hard to get a hold of. As I come around to the front of the table here in a minute and talk about some of the individual components, some of these things I had to wait for quite a long time before I was able to get a hold of them. For example, these microphones, two-month wait once I would place the order before they finally arrived. And I've got an order out right now for another camera receiver for this series. I've already been waiting 2 months, and they're expecting it's going to be at least one more before they finally ship it out to me. So a little harder to get, but I think it's absolutely worth it. You know, I've been a big fan of AKG for quite a long time, and so I'm willing to put forth that weight in order to get a high quality product that I know I can trust. So in this group of equipment here, you can notice that this is all rack mounted. Say audio is usually something I do separate from video, because I'm just one person running the engineering. Whenever we're doing video, we usually have somebody else do audio. We try not to do both in one particular event. That said, I do both fairly consistently back and forth. So I have experience in both areas. But when I'm doing audio, I'm using mostly stationary equipment. I do have a camera-mounted receiver. That's what I'm using for this video. But for the most part, we're talking about equipment that's rack-mounted for the receivers. And when I'm out on location shooting video, typically we're only working with 1 or 2 channels, and then I use one of my AKG systems with the camera-mounted receiver. With that said, let me talk a little bit about some of the different product lines. I've actually got 3 different lines here in what you're seeing. So these microphones here, these handheld microphones, and then the top receiver in this unit are the DMS800 series. This is AKG's top of the line system. They don't sell anything nicer than this. It's all digital, and so the communication between the microphone and the receiver is sent digitally, which means absolutely pristine sound quality. It also has the option for encryption, so that nobody can sit outside of a building and listen to what audio is going on. The downside is digital means there's a little bit of delay. And the delay is very, very minimal. We're not talking about anything significant. So when you're playing over a PA system, you'll never hear that delay. And if you're recording on camera, you'll never hear that delay. The downside, though, is when you're dealing with a musician that's wearing in-ear monitors. Quite often, they are able to sense that delay, and it drives them nuts. So digital's great if you're not using in-ear monitors. If you're using in-ear monitors, I definitely recommend going with analog. The next series, which you'll find below that in this rack, is the 4500 series, the DMS4500 series. Or sorry, WMS4500 series. That's all analog. This is more mainstream than their digital stuff, but it's also high-end. So these are serious products that cost some serious money. So if you're looking for a budget system, you're probably not going to be looking at the 4000 or 4500 series, unless you maybe acquire a used one and find a good deal on a used one somewhere. These are not terribly common. The 800 series is extremely uncommon. I've only actually seen, and I keep an eye on these things on eBay to see if any deals come up. And I think I've only seen anything from the 800 series come up one time in the 5 years that these products have been available. So, quite rare. And the 4500 series, because it is analog, it works better for in-ear monitors. It's potentially susceptible to dropouts and static and things like that, though, as I mentioned earlier, I haven't seen it. I cannot say that honestly, I have never had an issue with the quality of the audio coming through an AKG wireless system. So the WMS 800 series for digital, or DMS 800 series for digital, and then the WMS 4500 series for analog. And then over here, this is an older series, they no longer sell this, but it's WMS 450 series. It came out roughly the same time as the 4500, and they're actually compatible to some degree. You can use 450 series transmitters with 4500 receivers, and to some degree you can do the other as well. So you use a 4500 series transmitter with a 450 series receiver. There are a few issues about doing so. These also sound great. Because the systems are both compatible, what you end up with is basically the same quality audio out of both. And that's why I've got so many more of these. They cost a lot less, and the sound quality is basically just as good. And the downside is that the microphones themselves are not built as well. This is a plastic housing instead of metal, and so you're making that sacrifice, a little bit of sacrifice on the build quality in order to get the price down. That said, I haven't had any of them break. So in the 10 years that I've been using this series, roughly 10 years I've been using this series, I haven't had any of them break. So the fact that it's not metal has not been a problem for me. Now, if you're working in a rough environment, say you're on tour with a band, these are not right. These aren't going to be the way you want to go. They're just not built for that kind of heavy-duty use in a rough environment like that. So, in that case, you're going to be looking at something more like your 4500s or something from another manufacturer. So, even though these are discontinued, AKG has a newer series. It's called the 470, WMS 470 series. Basically 100% compatible between the two. The 470, the biggest advantage it has is that it adds some more sophisticated channel scanning capability. So when you're setting up your mics, they're a little faster and a little easier in order to make sure that in order to find the open channels so that you can run all the mics that you need to and make sure that you're not getting dropouts. So, other differences, the 450 and 470 series use infrared for setting up the microphones. So you navigate through the menus on the receiver itself, and then the receiver finds the appropriate frequency, or you want to adjust the gain, or a number of other parameters. You hit a button, and then it transmits the commands to the microphone. There's a little infrared window there. It transmits those over infrared, and so you program your mics that way. The 4500 series, no infrared, so everything is done through menus, both on the receiver and on the transmitters. So if you need to, when you go to set up frequencies and whatnot, you set it up on the receiver first, and then you dial those same frequencies into the transmitter manually. The digital series, DMS series, it also uses infrared for configuration. They've got the windows for that hidden. So what you have to actually do is open up the microphone, and there's your programming window there. So now, that said, I'm going to come around to the front here, and we'll talk a little bit more about each of the different models that are there. So on top, we've got the DSR 800 receiver. One nice thing about AKG's modeling number scheme is it's actually easy to understand. They use the same suffixes and same prefixes on all their models in order to describe what it does. So in this case, D is digital, SR means stationary receiver. The microphones, HT stands for handheld transmitter, so these are the DHT 800s. The pocket transmitters, such as this, are PT. So if I had one of the 800 series, that would be a DPT, DPT 80. So you can figure out what model number you need based on the way that they do their suffixes or prefixes. So these three units right here are the SR4500, so the stationary receiver for the 4500 series. Down at the bottom left, we've got an SR4000. The 4000 series is basically identical to the 4500. They just added additional frequencies. So if you can find one that works in a frequency range that works for you, go ahead and pick it up, because it's still very much relevant. And then this last one is actually SST4500. It's a stationary stereo transmitter, and this is actually used for in-ear monitors. So if a musician's playing on stage and they want to be able to wear a body pack to hear their monitor mix, this is the transmitter that works with that. It's also part of this 4500 series, and they work on the same frequencies. So, and because all this stuff interacts, you can actually receive the signal from the SST4500 on a 4500 receiver. So if you needed to send audio across a room and you didn't want to run cables, you could have your audio transmitted from the transmitter and then picked up on one of these receivers. The downside of that, of course, is these receivers are all monaural, so you wouldn't get the stereo, but they do work together. So that's a nice feature. Then one of the other main benefits of digital is, in addition to having very, very clear audio and encryption, this also has digital signal processing built in. So as I actually go into the menu here, I can navigate over and go over to the audio tab and go in there, and there's an option for DSP. And let me zoom in so you can actually see that a little bit better. So within the receiver itself, it's able to do a low cut, so you're able to block out the lower frequency signals that cause thumps and other unwanted anomalies. There's an equalizer, there's a compressor, and a limiter. And like I say, that's built right into the transmitter. Right into the receiver. So you don't necessarily have to have outboard equipment in order to perform those functions like you would on any of the analog. So you get a lot of processing going on right within the receiver itself. The other advantage is that one unit actually receives for 2 channels. So if we look at the display here, you can see that there's channel 1 and channel 2. So this one receiver is receiving for both of the 2 handheld microphones that are sitting on top of the rack here. There's a lot of other information that's conveyed as part of the transmitted signal. So for example, you can see in the middle here that the battery level on the 2 transmitters, it's in these cases very, very low. So that's a warning, like, hey, when there's a break in your show or a break in your program, get those batteries replaced. So someone operating audio can let somebody know that, hey, we need to get some batteries in there before long. There are some capabilities to have the displays on these units change color as there are alerts. So the other thing that's noteworthy about this digital series is they also have headphone outputs, and so you can monitor the audio from your microphones directly by plugging in a pair of headphones. You don't have to go through a mixer in order to do that. So the main problem with this one, it's just very, very rare. It's very hard to come by. Like I say, it took me several years before I finally saw one available for sale, and when it came available, I snatched it right up. So the DSR800 is still the current model, though I'm not seeing a lot of people still selling it. There's an older model, the DSR700, and I've never gotten a clearance on whether those are compatible or not, so I can't speak to that. All right. All of these units in this rack support a computer integration technology. You have a unit that's called AKG Hub 4000. You would plug that into up to 8 transmitter receiver units, or in this case a transmitter, and then plug the other end into the computer network, and that allows you to monitor your microphone setup on a computer, so you're able to see how well it's performing, do spectrum analysis in order to see what frequencies are open, and a bunch of other stuff. It does quite a lot. I have not been able to find a Hub 4000, and so I don't have that. Something I would like to have at some point, but again, because this is a somewhat rare product in the United States, I've not been able to locate one. So, and before I move off to the digital, the other thing to note here is that this actually does have digital outputs on it. So there's an AES EBU, so channels 1 and 2, your two microphones, and then there's also a Dante output. So if you're dealing in a studio or broadcast situation that uses a Dante for audio, there's a Dante output right on that receiver. All right, so moving to the 4500 series. This is a 4500 series transmitter, handheld transmitter, so it's the HT4500. One thing to be aware of when you're buying microphones at this level, this includes the digital, the transmitters don't come with the mic heads, and so you have to buy that separately. So in this case, I'm using what they call the D7. This is it's a dynamic microphone with a little bit of a presence boost, so it sounds a little bit more like a condenser. Very, very high quality audio. Again, that's one of the reasons I selected AKG. It's like their primary business for decades has been building microphones, and so you know when you get an AKG system that you're getting a very high quality microphone. My other transmitter, I'm using the D5 unit on top. So they also have a C5 available if you want condenser. I'm finding that condenser in a lot of situations that I'm doing are not the most wise choice, because they're more prone to feedback than the dynamic ones, although they do sound better. And I am with my older 450 series, most of my transmitters, handheld transmitters, are actually condenser. There, in addition to the HT4500, there is the PT4500 pocket transmitter, and that would be used for things like lavalier mics, such as this one. AKG has a whole line of those. Or, if I can pull this, untangle this, maybe not. It's the headset worn transmitter, and I've used that on quite a number of my videos. There we go. So, and they have several different models of those. Different levels of quality of audio and different pickup patterns. For example, the microphone that I'm wearing right now is a unidirectional, and so that it mostly only picks up audio straight above it. Whereas this other one that I wore for my lighting video, is actually an omnidirectional, so it picks up audio from all directions. Pros and cons to each. So in this case, I just wanted to switch to have something different. There wasn't any other reason for the switch, although this one probably is quieter. You hear less background noise than on the other one. So the other option for the pocket transmitters is a guitar cable. So you can plug a guitar directly into the transmitter and then have a fully wireless system for guitars. So the other unit that I have up here is the SPR 4500, and that's stereo pocket receiver. And this is the receiver that's used with the in-ear wireless. And so it's Diversity. It's got two antennas, and so you're able to get a very high quality signal without dropouts, even in a little pocket receiver like this. Before I go on, I probably ought to explain a little bit more about what Diversity is. All the microphone receivers that I use are all Diversity, and what that really means is that each one has two independent receivers, and then the electronics inside the device look at which signal is strongest, and then we'll switch back and forth up to several hundred times per second. So as someone is moving around, or things which might cause interference in the room are moving around, it's able to determine which of those two receivers has the best signal, and then instantly, seamlessly, without any noise, switch between them. And that's why these are able to sound so good. You're able to look on a receiver and see which of the two antennas is actually currently being used, A or B. And as someone walks around, you'll actually see that change quite a bit. As I was doing the setup for this video, and I was walking around the room, you can see the A and B switching back and forth. When I'm stationary like I am, you won't see much of that happening. But that's actually the Diversity capability is what allows a microphone in order to avoid interference and static, because it's able to say, okay, well, the signal's getting weaker, so I'm going to switch over here to this other receiver, this other antenna, and it's able to avoid any of the problems that are normally associated with wireless systems. And AKG's Diversity system works fabulously. It's amazing. So, okay, all right. So back to this. Whether you're dealing with analog or digital, you actually have to select frequencies for each of your receivers. And let me zoom in here. I'll navigate through the menu a bit. So right now you can see it's on US channel 7.008. And as I rotate over one notch, you can see that's on 513.3 megahertz. And that frequency was selected by the unit because it actually has the least interference on it. So when you're setting up your wireless microphone, you'll do a scan of the environment in order to see what frequencies are available. So in this case, I'm going to tell it auto scan, and I'm going to do it based on a group. For example, I'm going to tell it that I need 4 channels of audio, and so as I select that, it's going to use the US, and here it's doing the scan, and it basically came back and told me that there are no frequencies available. That's actually That's actually a false problem. My video production rack, for some reason, produces an awful lot of RF interference. And so whenever I have this equipment near my video production rack, the scan doesn't work. And it's not a flaw with the receiver, it's just that the video production rack that I've got just emits a lot of RF interference. And if I move it more than about 5 feet away, everything works great. So normally, you run the scan. This tells you which frequency of the ones that it scanned is best, and then you manually dial that into the transmitter. So in this case, there's a wheel there to navigate the menu. Then you would put that frequency in. So I'm just going to manually put in. Let me go here and manually change the frequency. So US 7.009. And so now, when I go to configure this microphone, I'll set it for 7.009, and then those two would be paired. And so as I talk in this microphone, you see just there on the screen that the audio level is peaking as I'm speaking. So but that's essentially it. So you go through those steps. And as mentioned earlier, with the 4500 series, you navigate through menus on the transmitter in order to set that. With the 450, 470, and 800 series, you'll use infrared. So after the receiver finds an open frequency, it uses infrared commands sent to the transmitter in order to set the frequency on the transmitter. So other than that, a setting. There's a setting in here to determine what level of signal is required before it actually allows audio. So if you know a microphone is going to be turned on and off, and you're only going to be using short range, you can actually set the sensitivity so it's not as high. That way, if someone does go out of range or it shuts it off, shut the microphone off, it instantly mutes. You don't have, there's not normally a problem anyway, but it instantly mutes, and basically saying unless I'm receiving a signal that's at least this strong, we're not going to be passing audio. Right now I've got it set for TCSQ, and that's tone code squelch. There is part of the signal from the transmitter, just basically a signal that says, hey, I'm here. And so as long as that signal is present, the microphones will pass audio if the TCSQ feature is enabled. If that tone is not there, say for example there's something else on that frequency that's not an AKG transmitter, it mutes. And so you're not getting interference from something that's not an AKG microphone. Other manufacturers have similar features as well. Being able to set that manually is something you only generally find on the higher end receivers. So it's nice that it's there. There's also a rehearsal feature. When you set that, you basically walk around the area where the microphone might be used, and the transmitter will let you know how far into that path time-wise that there was a problem with the signal. So for example, you start walking, and 10 seconds later it senses a dropout. When you come back to the receiver, it'll give you a little report that says at 10 seconds the signal level was a little bit low, so you can know that. There's also places to set names on these, so you don't have to refer to the transmitter and receiver as the frequency or the channel. You can actually put a name on there. So if you have a performer named Gary, you can put the name Gary right on the screen and be able to instantly know by looking at that receiver who it is that's on that particular mic. On my 450s, what I did is I did the color. So I color code nearly all of my mics. You see the red and the blue here. I color code all of those, and so when I look at my receiver, oh, that's the red microphone. So anyway, that's basically what's going on with the 4500 series. As I mentioned, the 4000 series is identical, except it's older and a different set of frequencies. But again, if you can find one in the frequency band that works for you, pick it up. They still work great. The electronics are almost identical. The schematic drawings for the 4500 and the 4000 are actually the same. So let's say the last one on here. This is the transmitter for the in-ear wireless system. So works a little differently than the other units here. Is like you don't scan the environment from the transmitter. You scan the environment from the receiver, and then you put the frequency that the receiver finds into the transmitter in order to pair those up. So AKG's implementation has some cool things in the transmitter. There's a compressor, there's a limiter on the audio, so pretty nifty stuff there. This series is called the IVM4500 instead of WMS. Like WMS is a wireless microphone system. IVM, I'm not sure exactly what that stands for, but that's what they call it, the IVM4500. There's an older IVM4, which is based on the 4000 series, very similar. I've never gotten my hands on one of those, so I can't speak to how good it is, but though I suspect it's probably very good. This system, again, is very good. The the receiver is a little more prone to interference than the stationary units like this, but that said, it's worked great. I've not had any complaints with it. Some of the other in-ear monitor systems that I've used have been very, very noisy, and the musicians have to walk around to specific places on stage in order to be able to receive a strong quality signal. This has not been the case with these AKGs, and they have worked absolutely great. So, one other thing to mention here. I have here, this is the CU700, CU's charging unit. It will also charge the batteries in the 800 series. Right now I have alkaline batteries in there, but if you put a nickel metal hydride battery in the transmitters, then you can charge in the base just by inserting them, dropping them in. So that unit does work with the DMS700 series and the DMS800 series. So, all right, so I'm going to pause the video for a minute and reorient myself, and we'll look at the 450s. All right, on this other side we've got my WMS450 series, and basically everything I'm going to say here applies to the current 470 model as well. And a lot of it applies to their lower end 420 model, though those are not near as flexible when it comes to the selection of available frequencies. So one thing that's different about this is compared to my other rack is I'm using basically their antenna combiners on this one. So amplifier is actually technically a better term for it. So this unit on the left here, it's a PS81. This is from their very old WMS80 series, 81 series. But they still work just fine with the newer units. And not only does this allow me to use a minimal number of antennas, it also distributes power to all these receivers. And so inside the back of this rack, there is just 2 power cords. There's one for each one of these PS81 units, and then each one of these drives 4 of the microphone receivers. So if you look at the top of my rack here, you'll see that I've got 2 antennas on the front, and then there are 2 antennas on the back. The ones on the front are for channels 1 through 4, and the ones on the back are for channels 5 through 8. It's technically possible to use a single set of antennas. You could actually do a simple splitter, though there's no reason for me to not do it this way. It works great, and these top units I have are actually on a lower frequency than the ones on the bottom, so they need a very slightly longer antenna in order to have optimal reception. So when you're buying any of these units, you have to be aware of the frequency range that they support. So even though these are all WMS80 or WMS450 series receivers, they're all the SR450s, they operate in different frequency bands. So for example, these top ones I have here all operate in what they call band 7. And what that means is that, band 7 for AKG for this series is 500 to 530 megahertz. When you get into their digital, they use a different numbering system. When you get into their lower ends, they use letters instead of numbers for the bands. But you got to make sure when you're buying that you're buying in a frequency range that works in your particular area. Where I live, band 7 is the best. There's the least interference. These microphones all use the same frequency ranges as broadcast television, and so you really need to do a little bit of research before you go and buy to find out what frequencies are used by your local television stations, so that you're not trying to buy a microphone in a frequency range that has no unused radio spectrum. So in my area, 7 is the best, and followed by 8, and then 1. 1 is an older band. It's 600 megahertz range, like I forget the exact numbers. The problem with that is that in the United States, sometime in the next couple of years, the 600 megahertz band is going to be reallocated from television to cellular. And what that essentially means is it will be illegal to use a microphone in that frequency range at that time. Back in 2009, we had a transition out of the 700 megahertz range, and that spectrum was purchased by the government and resold to Verizon, AT&T, and other cell phone carriers. And at that point, it became illegal to use any of the microphones that operated anywhere in the 700 megahertz series. That's about to happen again in the 600 megahertz series. So if you're buying now, make sure you avoid 600 megahertz, anything between 600 and 700 megahertz. There's even some speculation that they may go into the high 500s. And so if you're looking at microphones right now, look for microphones in the 400 megahertz range. 500 megahertz range is probably generally okay. 900, though there aren't many of those. 2.4 gigahertz is another one that's okay, although I would avoid that one in any environment where there's a lot of cell phones or Wi-Fi, because you're sharing radio bandwidth with those devices. Though the 2.4 gigahertz microphone systems that I've used, and I even own a couple, have worked okay. So just a word of caution. So for example, if you were to be doing audio in a stadium where there's 50,000 people with cell phones that are all trying to find a Wi-Fi hotspot and trying to communicate on Bluetooth, a 2.4 gigahertz antenna or 2.4 gigahertz microphone is probably not a good choice there. And so just do a little bit of homework before you make your purchase. But you have to make the decision before you buy. So even though these have selectable transmission, receiving, and reception frequencies, they're only within certain bands. So it's like say band 7, and then some of these are band 1. So basically what that means is within the next couple of years, I'm going to have to replace these. I'll have to sell them. The other downside of this is once the FCC makes that transition, it's actually illegal to sell these things in the United States. And so it's best to not get them in the first place, because once that transition happens, you won't be able to legally sell them here in the U.S. You can sell them overseas, but it's hard to find buyers overseas on that kind of thing. So just something to be aware of. So 400 or 500 megahertz, okay. 600, no, don't do it. 700 megahertz, very highly illegal. Not only is it illegal, it also won't work very well, because you're competing against any cell phones that are in the area. The LTE band of cell phones is in the 700 megahertz range. There's also Homeland Security that uses 700 megahertz, as well as public safety, and so you just really don't want to be in that band. Not only is it illegal, it's not going to work very well. So with all that said, let's get back to these units. So rotate a little direct towards the camera. So I say these are the 450 SR450 receivers, and then I have the HT450 transmitter, and this is the version that has the C5 condenser, and I can actually see that on there. It says condenser right on the microphone. If there's no words on there, it's the D5 transmitter, which even though it's less expensive, still sounds great, so I wouldn't hesitate. I also have the PT450 transmitter. These things are pretty tiny, so definitely easier to hide than a bigger unit. There are some smaller units from other manufacturers, but they tend to be incredibly expensive. These are, as mentioned, these are programmed using infrared. So Let me see if I actually have battery in this one. Yes, I do. Okay, so I'm going to put that in programming mode, and then I'm going to come up to the receiver, and I'm going to go into its menu. And then I'm going to navigate over to Auto Group and tell it I'm going to allocate for, I need 3 channels, and it's US, and there it is. I found US channel 7.103. And I'll say, okay, that's fine. Save it to the receiver, yes, and then you get to the program IR. And so at this point, I point the infrared window on the transmitter at the infrared emitter on the unit, press the button, then it comes back and says IR OK. And so at that point, these two are operating on the same frequency. There's other parameters that can be included in that setup as well. For example, the gain. With condenser microphones like this, you probably don't want to have a super high gain, because if you got somebody, a singer for example, who really belts things out, that will actually distort. So at that point you would go to the receiver and go to the menu, tell it you want the transmitter to be in low gain, and then you do the program infrared command in order to reprogram the transmitter with that new parameter. So, all right, you can see inside just one AA battery, and the battery lasts for about 6 hours on those. So, so that's kind of the gist of that. These work great. I would not hesitate to buy these as long as you're okay with the plastic housing. The sound quality, I think, is just as good as the higher end units. So I've made most of my investment in the 450 and 470 series. So I've got this rack, and then I have another rack that has just as many, has another 8. And then I've got a whole bunch of individual as well. I think in total I probably have 25 different units in the 450 and 470 series. So in terms of using any of these with production audio, obviously something like this is going to be a little bit inconvenient to hook up to a camera, but you certainly can do it. And these also run off 12 volts, so if you wanted to, you run it off battery, and you just pick up a generic 12 volt battery somewhere, plug it into the back, and it'll work great. AKG does sell little receivers that go on top of the camera. The prefix on those is PR, and so PR450, PR4500. I'm actually using one of the PR4500s for this video. The receiver is on top of the camera. Hard to find, but they do work great, and so it allows you to use any of these transmitters with a camera that's moving around, and it works just fine. So anyway, if you have questions or comments, be sure to leave them down below. Be sure to like and subscribe. I'll have more videos coming up. Most of my videos are focused more on video, but I'm open to doing audio stuff as well. I'd be happy to bring any of my audio gear inside and hook it up and give demos and explain how it works. But anyway, like I say, like and subscribe. Appreciate you watching, and we'll talk to you soon.